Hey, welcome to Torque Transferred, where we take uncommon perspectives and apply them to some outrageous challenges. I'm so happy to have our guest here with us today, Chase Eiserman, who's the Chief Industry Development Lead for AFWERX, which is, for those of you that don't know, the Air Force's main innovation body. Chase, welcome. It's so nice to have you here today.
Joy, thanks so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive in. So, hey, let's start with my favorite question that I ask every guest. Tell me who Chase is in one headline.
Yeah, true blue Air Force through and through, right? Mom, dad, stepdad, all retired Air Force. Knew pretty young, probably 4 years old, that I was going to go that way. Targeted junior ROTC, then ROTC, and everything was a leading step to get me into active duty.
I love it. I talking to you, when I asked you previously, getting to know you over the last couple of years, how did you know you're supposed to be in the Air Force? Like, I imagine you as a 4-year-old having your moment, and your response, correct me if I'm wrong, was, well, this is just what Eisermans do. Like, I know I'm supposed to do this, right? So it's in your fabric, it's in your DNA, and I love that. So, being a true blue and having multi-generational Air Force family, how do you think that shaped you growing up? I'm very much not like you. You and my sister are very similar. You basically came out of the womb knowing who you were meant to be, and I was like a ping pong ball. So I'm always fascinated when people know really young. Tell me about your experience as a kid, and and how that really shaped to where you are today.
Yeah, it's ironic that we're talking about this right now. I was sitting just next to where I am right now, talking to my mom about this last night. And we're talking about my son, and he's kind of ambling through life. He's a 14-year-old right now, doesn't really know what he wants to do. And my daughter is the exact opposite, similar to you and your sister, right? She's laser focused. She's a gymnast. She's going to college. She's going to do X, Y, and Z. And my mom mentioned last night, I didn't know I was going to go to the Air Force. It just kind of happened. I fell into it. So I, yeah, to your point, I don't know what that moment was, but it was that community that I felt, because everyone I was around since I was born was in the Air Force. So it was,
Yeah.
that is my family, extended family, obviously outside of the house. And it was just logical for me to continue to work towards, joining that family on the operational side of things.
Yeah, that's amazing. What is another industry that you think does a nice job of building intentional community? Like, I think the military is amazing at it, because of just the nature of of the mission and how people have to move and be tight knit and trusted. Do you think there's another industry or sector that you look to that almost reverberates that type of community that's not the armed services?
Yeah, I mean, the next logical extension would be public service, right? So thinking police
Yeah.
officers, firefighters. I think that's logical. Man, if I dive into private industry, though, the band of brothers in the venture capital and startup community seems pretty, everybody's
Yeah.
championing each other. It doesn't seem, and this is just a lay person for the past 2.5 years, it feels like that's a community of growers and developers, and they all want to champion each other. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of, certainly there's competitive for raises and things like that, but there's a community, certainly here in Austin, you've witnessed it through South by Southwest and Fed Supernova. I mean, that community here in the Texas corridor, they're just all craving for success for each other. So maybe in the private sector, that's where we could go.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really hard. It's really easy for people to say it's important to build community, it's important to build culture, but then the how, and then the how it sticks is very, very difficult and to pull off. So okay, so I learned a surprising fact about you, and it has nothing to do with the Air Force, and I would like to talk about it.
Okay.
Talk to me about cowboy boots and what you learned when you had your job producing the cowboy boots.
Oh,
Boots,
wow.
right?
So I would consider myself relatively good at most things. And, school for the most part was not challenging, but transitioning out of high school and then into college again, I put in what I needed to, but it wasn't terribly difficult. But when I entered the boot making industry, that was a world of lessons learned, obviously. So for those that don't know about the artistry of making significantly high-priced boots, which I was not when I entered this world, it takes months and months of rigorous hand work to make boots. on the tune of some being upwards of $20,000 based on the leather and the time and things that go into it. About 2 months in, I had ruined enough boots that my boss was like, "You're a great kid, but this isn't for you. And we'd like to stay in touch, but you just can't work here anymore." So one of those life lessons that, wow, humbling at a bright young age and brought a new
Yeah.
perspective to the rest of my life.
Yeah. Know thyself, right?
Right.
I just love that story. I think it's so fascinating. Yeah, it just made me giggle learning that about you. So that was pretty cool. Because most of us know you as, the Mr. AFWERX. So don't really know you as Mr. Texas. So thank you for sharing that. So you're 4 years old, right? You have this moment in time where you're meant to do Air Force things, maybe not really sure how that's going to manifest, but you're chasing that. I know that when I was 5 years old, I would walk into the kitchen and everything that I needed was right at my fingertips, right? And I got really creative, by the way, of the meals that I cooked based on the ingredients in that kitchen. But you walk in and it's all kind of there. And as a kid, you don't really think about the fact that, for my mom, she was working 2 jobs to make sure that there's food in the fridge and things of that nature. And I think it's a fascinating metaphor for when we compare the contracting workforce to the operational workforce that we support, right? A lot of the ops guys and gals show up to where they're at and they're just like, "Yep, this is great. All my stuff is here. Let's go on mission." But there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes to get to that moment. So talk to me a little bit about your experience at Mount Sinjar. What happened and what is your aha moment, in that phase of your career?
Yeah, I think one of the foundational points that a lot of people don't realize is that at the height of the two front war that we were fighting, contracting was at a 1-to-1 dwell, 6 months on, 6 months off. I mean, they were at the same pace as our operational units, either ground-based in support or the fighter wings. I mean, that rotational track is what we felt for 8 years, and we were filling everybody else's empty vacancies across the department overseas. So thinking Navy, Army specifically. So keeping that in mind, that even in a support function, we're that task saturated that we're going over as often as everybody else. So that was one anecdote that I don't think a lot of the non-support functions took into account, that we were also definitely in the fight from a contracting perspective right alongside with them. And then getting to Mount Sinjar. So it was right when the war with ISIS really kicked off and they were pushing south into Iraq. And we had a host of Christians stuck on Mount Sinjar, and we were doing airdrop missions to get them humanitarian aid. And one of the benefits of being deployed is I can take my contracting compatriots and the squadron members and go down and see, the post-mission gunship, AC-130 gunship that has come back, and see some video of what they've supported through their contracting activities. And in this particular case, we went down to the 130 squadron, and we were walking through their shoring line where they put all the airdrop materials together. And I, just out of pure happenstance, young sergeant says, "Hey, we're out," mentions to his master sergeant, "We're out of wood shoring. We need saws, we need blades." And the airman I'm with turns to me and says, "Well, sir, we buy all that." I said, "Absolutely. So go talk to him." Well, there was that disconnect, right? So to your point, the operational guys are sitting there, they're hyper focused on the ops in front of them, and they're frustrated by not having the gear that they need and the equipment at their fingertips. And we are sitting at our desk waiting for requirements to come to us. In this case, that would be the requirement from the airfield. So making that kismet connection, that human connection, now they're directly tied. We can get things rolling. And literally within 24 hours with a credit card, we're downtown buying up all the shoring materials to get them out on mission and doing airdrops in a very, very important role that they play every day. So yeah, I think in general, so it goes 2 ways, right? To your point about the 5-year-old flipping on the light switch and opening the refrigerator, everything's there. There's that loss of context on who's actually delivering that. And then conversely, sitting in an office working on a computer and doing requirements all day and contract activity, you don't feel that operational impact that you visibly see it. And we got to see it that day.
What is the term wars are won in the margins mean to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, AFWERX is trying to get after that, right? That's the whole point of what we're doing. The bleeding edge technology that we don't want other folks to see or have, and things that we need to get out to the warfighter as quickly as possible that we're not addressing internal. So those margin calls are exactly what we're talking about. So in getting back to Mount Sinjar, had we not walked down there that day, maybe the resource advisor on the ops field would ask the right question at the right time in the right meeting and get that information to us. Conversely, maybe it doesn't ever happen and that mission misses their window and they don't get the supplies out there. So yeah, it's that margin activity where we know what our strategy is, we know what our operational goal is, but it's everything in support on the outside that may or may not get taken care of in a timely manner.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so interesting how the quick moments of happenstance line up, right? Where you basically are forcing that team integration. But it was a serendipitous accident, right? Like it just like
Right.
happened to line up. So I'm really hungry to figure out how industry can partner with government to create more of those serendipitous moments, but be intentional about it. And I do think that we're headed in the right direction. But you see little pockets of these stories. And I'm like, man, how do we get that? How do we achieve that at scale? So,
Well, and to your point, we have those
yeah.
margin interactions, like the event, South by Southwest is a perfect one. Folks from, the customer end user run into somebody and they have that kismet moment of, you have the solution to my wicked problem. And then it's that margin effort, right? Where's acquisition lay in? Where does funding lay in? So we have those great kismet moments, and then what is the next step? And that's the piece I think you're alluding to that we're missing, is that logical operational execution.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's go back in time a little bit. You've got one deployment under your belt, which was Kabul, I believe, 8 months, right? At this part of your career. And you have this, kismet moment for yourself, I think, where you move from operational contracting, which we just heard about, to systems contracting. So take me back to the Friday evening that you had the moment to make that jump.
Yeah, so I'm a young, naive first lieutenant at the time, my first foray into operational, just a couple weeks in. As you mentioned, a Friday evening, about to head home. And we're physically separated from, in the contracting terms in our section, from the program office. Walk across the hall, knock on the program manager's door. Hey, we're heading out. You need anything? And the program manager turned to me and looked at me like I was literally crazy. Like, what do you mean, do I need anything? I don't know. Is there anything that we need to knock out today before that can't wait? Well, no one's ever asked me that before. I don't know. So that was a weird moment in time for me. And it was a realization that I have seen play out 100 times since, right? There's this divide, and I think it's important for industry to understand this too. And I'm sure business units on the private side operate in much the same way. There's a competitive environment even within acquisition program teams, where does the program team lead and where do roles and responsibilities of the contracting officer take over? And there's a healthy friction there, but then it can get very unhealthy very quickly, right? And in this particular office, it had been very unhealthy for a very long time.
Yeah. It sounds like you're aptly named, because all of your stories, you're constantly chasing the difference between, customer A to user B, or operational contracting community to systems contracting. There's I feel like every story that I learned about you, you're in that divide, and you're constantly chasing that divide, which is really inspiring. And from somebody from industry to know that people like you exist inside government, I think it's really, really important. Let's pivot a little bit to one of the problems you're most proud of solving in, the history of your true blue career. And I'm referring specifically to your ask of send me to the worst contracting shop in the Air Force. First of all, what made you even ask that question? Second of all, how did it work out?
Yeah, so I was deployed to Mosul, Iraq at the time, and I had been at Ogden Air Force Base for 3 years and kind of topped out based on my rank and grade there for opportunities. So called AFPC from the desert and said, where can I go? And they didn't have a ton of options, and just kind of stopped them mid-conversation. I said, well, where's the worst contracting office in the Air Force right now. And they told me the name, and I said, well, just send me there. I'm sure there's an opening. And I had orders within about 2 days, which is incredibly rare if you know anything about the orders
Yeah.
process. So went back home and got out and got to work. And honestly, yeah, it was a broken organization. One of the first things I was introduced to was weeks before I had gotten there, the vice chief of staff of the Air Force, his GSA car was impounded from his house because the contract had lapsed. I mean, that was the level of things that we were dealing with in this organization.
God.
So one of the greatest commanders I've ever worked for at the time, he had instituted some kind of scrutiny over the organization, rightly so. But that was a culture shock to that organization. Obviously, he hadn't been there much longer than I had. So not only was it getting the business right, it was getting everybody accustomed and attuned to not taking it personally and just getting back to doing things the right way. And
Yeah.
it turned out within 2 years, we had won awards at the Air Force level for contracting activities. So we made massive inroads and rebuilt trust across our customer base on what we could deliver in the right way. And the culture, of course, came along, or the people that didn't want to accommodate left. So
Yeah. So one might say that you are a turnaround specialist of sorts inside the government.
yeah, I like to think so. I think transparency has a lot to do with that. And I don't know how you are in just human interaction and communication. I have an expressive face, I've been told by leadership, which has gotten me in trouble more times than I care to to remember. But I think there's value in that, right? Industry
Yeah.
can see it, and the people I work with every day can see it. So there's no hiding my true feelings on an order, and I
Yeah.
think there's value in that.
Yeah. I mean, I think when people, in my experience, when people experience leadership or their chain of command in an inconsistent way,
Mhm.
that actually is root cause to a lot of issues versus consistently transparent, whether it's good or bad. Like if it's I think the root cause of good culture really ties down to consistency, and consistency doesn't mean staying the same. It can mean evolving. It should mean evolving, right? Because what served you once doesn't always serve you forever. But you can still be consistent in the approach and the delivery and the values. So, whether that's, my eyes rolling in the back of my head at an idea or smiling, sometimes you don't know. So I'm quite expressive as well, being Italian from Detroit. You can't really hide a whole lot, So, based on what you're working on right now, what is, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about your biggest fail, in all of your true blue career. Your biggest fail, and I want to also pose a question as you talk about this fail. I think it's really easy for industry in particular to read headlines of other industry folks like, XYZ company wins Cyber 3, multi-year, blah, blah, blah. But what a lot of folks don't see is the epic failures, leading up to this
Right.
big moment. Right? And same thing with companies like Amazon and Google. We see these like massive conglomerates. We forget at one point, Bezos was almost about to file for bankruptcy and fold in his bookstore, right? So like it's really easy to forget about those moments. So I'm interested to dig in a little bit more about a big fail that you had and what you learned from it, and also what's inspiring you to get up every day and continue to fight the battles.
So the battle is the easy part, right? First and foremost, the thing that matters most is the people that I work with, whether that means, above me or below me, and what we're supporting. And it's easy to tie directly into, especially now with Secretary Kendall in the seat and his 7 operational imperatives. I mean, on a daily basis, every task we do, every meeting we take, does it align to one of those? And if it doesn't, then we need to move off that as quickly as possible. So the why is the easy part. So fails, wow, that's a long list. After 18 and a half years, especially in contracting, I would say one, and it was back with that particular organization that I asked to go to. And it was a personal fail of mine. Just for context, the contract was 2 years behind. It needed to be done soon. It was multi-million dollars. It was low risk at the end of the day. And people were just hammering, and this is not necessarily just an Air Force issue or government issue, but history plays so much in currency that it just drives conversation into places that there's no value, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not that guy. I'm out in front. What are we doing to change things and get better and execute? And this meeting was just droning on and on about why we were in the position we were in, and I wasn't even a part of that, but I'm now the CEO on this effort. And finally, inappropriately, raised my voice and said, much that to that context, I wasn't a part of that. We need to move forward and let's just move on. And was summarily told that's not appropriate for the workplace, which was fine, and they were probably right. But at the end of the day, I won over some hearts and minds by expressing that, and then doing the mea culpa tour afterwards. Sorry, I shouldn't have raised my voice, but it was a personal failure in measuring my response and things like that. But at the end of the day, it had the appropriate effect, and we got the contract out the door. And I would say conversely, major fails in the past were the opposite, not doing that and just keeping my head down and going with something that I knew would not necessarily work out in the end. I wouldn't say any of the failures were major, but there's always this disconnect. And General Holt and his Holtisms. And when we look at being outcome based and acquisition, we're not there yet at all. And you probably experienced this when you were at OSD. I mean, there's a difference between execution and delivering, and we're very execution focused. And that was a failure that I internalized on a regular basis, because it was getting that result from the end user saying, yeah, thanks for awarding my contract, but now I need to go do this instead because that didn't work, and just didn't flex enough or push back enough on the appropriate authorities to help the end user in the end. So I think that's important for industry to understand too, in those contexts of, hey, I just linked up with this really rabidly excited customer and end user, and they're ready to move out, and they said this is exactly what they need, and they turn to the acquisition community and they're like, oh yeah, we need to compete it, and all, just that failure to really push back and do what is in the best interest of operational outcomes, as opposed to just doing what's easy. So right.
Yeah, I think that I had the opportunity to deliver a TEDx talk at DAU now two summers ago. And as part of that research, I got to talk to a lot of incredible experts at cabinet level, joint staff, acquisition heads, uniform, civilian, everything in between. And one of my interviews, I'm losing who exactly said this right now, but essentially the call to the contracting community was, hey, I need you to know your authorities and use them to the greatest extent possible. And I thought that was so simple.
Yeah, right.
But also really helpful, similar to Secretary Kendall's 7 imperatives, right? And as a leader in a growing company, when I haven't laid out a charter like that, I need you to use your authorities to the greatest extent possible, right? Find the line, cross it once, as long as it's not unethical and you're not like hurting people, and I'm going to have your back, and then we found it, right? But I'd rather have somebody lean as far forward as possible. And so anyway, I found that when I don't do that, I end up being surprised that we're not getting forward progress. And I'm like, wait a minute, hang on. We have to know what's important and what to work on. And I've had great experiences, how you and I first met, one through the South by community, but also through our own SIVR process. And you were so helpful of explaining, what we could do, what we couldn't do, where I learned a lot through that process. And so I always get inspired to meet contracting officers in leadership roles like yourself. And I'm hungry for you to be able to build more of you inside government, which is what it sounds like you're doing, because it's definitely needed for sure.
Yeah, that's the plan. And just a quick example of that. So last 2 weeks ago, we had the AFWERX Innovation Days in conjunction with IMSC down here in San Antonio. And Tuesday and Wednesday I just did Q&A sessions. And then Thursday was the big room to present phase 3 and tech transition a brief I'm sure you've seen before. And I just kind of led with one chart and it said, hey, this is all recorded previously. The charts are out there. What do you guys want to talk about? And 50 hands out of 1,000 went up, and and that's really, I
Yeah,
think, in terms of the big fail right now is that, back to your point about consistency in
yeah,
messaging, in truth telling. That's the piece that I have found in the last 2.5 years that industry is craving. Industry doesn't care if they get bad news; they just want the news so that they can pivot and make
correct,
a strategic
correct.
decision.
Yes,
Right. And
violent
we
agreement.
are so we are so petrified on the government side of saying the wrong thing, or it being misconstrued, or it being reported somewhere, that we, in lieu of saying the wrong thing, we say absolutely nothing that leads to even more bad outcomes,
Yep,
press, relationships,
yep,
whatever the case may be. So,
yep. And bad news does not get better in time,
right, right,
especially for small companies, right? Like if you're not going to win something, or it's going to get kicked to the right for whatever reason, that matters less than just knowing at the moment in time, so you can flex with your internal cycles, right? And a lot of small businesses too really struggle with a financial strategy, because
mhm,
your finances are based off revenue. And so if you're like a sub to a sub, right, with net 90 payment terms, where it's supposed to be net 60, but then what ends up happening, right? So you're fronting all this cash and you're making this bet on this other award, and even if it doesn't happen, that then triggers just different actions in your capitalization strategy, right? And
mhm.
so the sooner that the better. So as you can tell, I've experienced this.
Well, I
you
would
know
offer too, to take us completely off topic really quickly. So, in terms of capital considerations and funding structures, so just very quickly, very simply, for the entire industry community that may or may not be watching. So, 3,600 funds, R&D funds, thinking
Mhm,
business to business interactions. That's a customer sales relationship.
mhm.
That's not how money works in the military, right? And you understand this more than anybody. So 3,600 funds specifically, that's a partnership. That is not a customer relationship. So I think a
Yeah,
lot to your point of small businesses are like, oh, I got the golden ticket. I got my phase one. I got my phase two. I got contract X period. And then they don't think about the color of money on there. And then they're
yes,
frustrated and stuck, and their business potentially folds because what they thought was their gateway to long-term annual revenue return turns out to be just an expressway to the stop sign. So,
yep, absolutely. um I'm interested in a couple more points.
mhm.
One, do you have your own definition of defense innovation?
I don't. And in fact, we deliberately do not use the word innovation in our Rapid X side of things. Now,
Mhm,
obviously, AFWERX, that is their buzzword. But on the contracting and acquisition side, what I have found, and it's unfair to industry, to be frank, is words. I guess because we're so litigious and we read the FAR, and we're looking for the right definition of a specific word, because innovation doesn't have a very accustomed and agreed upon definition. When I use that word in an acquisition community, their faces go blank and they shut down, the blast shields go up, and they go, just even the introduction of that word says this is going to be hard and I don't want to try. So no, I don't
interesting.
use the word definition or the word innovation because, and this is a larger conversation, but we don't need acquisition reform. So I don't need innovative acquisition tools. I don't need innovation written into the FAR. I have everything at my fingertips. To your point, who you interviewed that said, use your tools to the best extent possible. I can do everything I could possibly imagine for speed and efficiency and delivering at scale and cost with what I have in my tool set today. But if I say I want to do something in an innovative way, that means instantaneously hard. I'm going to have to learn something new. I don't want to do that. So, no, I personally do not have a definition for defense innovation. And and it's challenging too to make that correlation between industry and what they are doing that's so bleeding edge technology versus what, for example, AFWERX is funding, which is 90% component, subcomponent level items or services, products, software, whatever the case may be, that's commercially available. So to us, it's innovative because we're doing something new and potentially novel at the time for us. But industry probably looks at that and goes, we were there 10 years ago. Thanks for finally catching up.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah,
innovation, just even the term seems to turn some heads and engender some negative feelings about that process, especially in acquisition. But I'm sure you've talked to enough spark cells to know they probably feel the same way when they go to the wing and they're championing for dollars or anything. That
Yeah.
just that for whatever reason that word is just off-putting to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the point of the unintended trigger of this is going to be hard, so I shouldn't try it as the response to the word innovation. And the reason why I bring it up specifically is there's with the shuffling of the Defense Innovation Board and the, new chair and having Bloomberg and Wilt Roper involved and what the Defense Innovation Board's charter looks like and what they're carrying out. What I personally am struggling with to wrap my head around is if the department was going to win on defense innovation, whatever that means to you, or maybe it's just like the next evolution of where we are. Maybe it doesn't have to do with innovation, but if they're going to win in that space, in that white space, right, between how we used to do things and how we need to do things, what does that win actually look like? And I've talked to a lot of people about it, and myself included, it can't really wrap my head around what that actually looks like. So I'm just curious of your thoughts there, and if you think the Defense Innovation Board, what the Defense Innovation Board could do to move from activities to outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, the foundational answer to that question is what kind of money do they have? So AFWERX runs into this same issue, right? AFWERX only has 3,600 funds, which means we fundamentally cannot deliver capability because we don't have the dollars to do that. Like Army Futures Command, who until recently, I believe, had operational funds, O&M funds, they could execute a program. So if that innovation side of the house gets not just 3,600 funds, but operational funds, that's how you are able, maybe not at scale, but at least to get initial rollout of operational capability to the field. Period. Dot. And so that goes back to PPBE rewrite. And I don't know if you saw General Holt's post the other day on LinkedIn about the appropriators and everything. So there is a conversation around that, and that's how we get from innovation to operational use and winning, whatever the case may be. But the other part, the way I would rephrase your question is, what does success look like? And no one can define. I'm like you. I ask that question everywhere I go. Whoever I talk to, if someone says we're failing, I'm like, well, graded against what? Because I don't know. So for AFWERX, I would argue that our grade is to expend, our budget annually, which we do. So that is by definition of success. Now, Secretary Kendall probably has a different definition of success. I just don't know what that is right now. So that would be the other question I asked. So in their charter, is it quantifiable qualitative metrics specifically not aligned to the expenditure of funds? So are we grading that activity against operational utility? And then we may or may not get into it, but then when you lob in economic warfare on top of that, is that a sub strategy to that effort? So we won't see necessarily outcomes, but we will get some other ancillary benefit off of that. That to me is also success, but not everybody sees it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's wrap on that point. Top of mind problem to you right now, outside of the innovation bucket, obviously the AFWERX innovation and RapidX, contracting is one piece of your greater role as an airman, right? That's what you're doing today, but your role is much larger than that. So talk to me about the top of mind problem for you, especially if you look at the next 20 years of airmen, right? What they're, coming up to tackle and lead. And also a challenge to the community, right? Whether it's industry, uniforms, public servants, military, and anywhere in between, top of mind problem and what's the challenge to the community and how we can help.
So internal to the government side, there is an obligation and responsibility from your contracting community to deliver and this is my opinion, to deliver market research in a new and novel way, not doing market research on known requirements. So thinking back to Mount Sinjar, someone actually lets us know that they need saws and wood and things like that. But thinking more innovation cell-based, where airmen are in a room next to the flight line thinking about the wicked problems of the day, and we have a contracting person there that goes, I understand your problem. Let me go find out what I can on potential solutions, and not waiting for the requirement to land on their desk. Again, thinking about operational outcomes, right? The operators may not know what they need, but they know they have a problem. I, as a contracting person, should be able to go investigate that and do market research on ideas and concepts as opposed to requirements. So that is the top of mind problem for me right now. And it directly links between institutional contracting, AQC, and what AFWERX does and has in their portfolio. So when you, Boone Group, come to me and go, we did great, now what? Then I can say, here's the actual path, the actual community that's doing market research that needs to find you. And that doesn't exist today. So that's my initial top of mind. And if we don't change, and I'm not saying anything that General Holt hasn't said out loud before, not changing today, we know we'll be worse off in less than 20 years, right? 5, 8, whatever his date now is. This is one of the primary ways we don't get worse over time, is this move from market research being activity based in the moment against a requirement into ideas and concepts and finding novel bleeding edge. Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that's top of mind. Internal. So external, it's getting educational materials and connection out to industry so that they understand exactly what they're dealing with. So anecdotally, how many CIBR contracts do we actually want to transition ever since 1982? The answer is not very many, right? Because just like a venture capital firm, we're looking for best of breed, the next generational. So I'm doing everything I can to educate the community on entering our process is great. That non-dilutive capital is wonderful, but BD doesn't end, and your commercial outcome has to be established before you do anything to try to get to transition to operational use in the Air Force or DoD in general, bearing in mind that stream could dry up at any moment, right? So commerciality is key. And I think a lot of people, we probably just don't do a good enough job telling that story, or maybe people just don't believe it. I'm not sure, but that is also top of mind for me, is making sure that industry understands we're doing the best we can, but transition isn't the number one goal. It's getting the small business dollars out to small businesses so they can go off and do great things commercially, and then we can consume them later if dollars are there.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Well, this has been such a pleasure to spend time with you today. I love how your brain works, and I want to figure out a way to scale, your approach to things and create 1,000 Chase Eisermans running around, whether it's in the Air Force or outside, because I think the world needs more of your thought process. Where do we find you? How do we stay in touch? And any other last minute challenges to the community?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, I'm the only Chase Eiserman out there. I think there might be one other one, at RapidX on LinkedIn as well. So RapidX, just for the audience, we have folks all over the United States and the globe at this point in our Rolodex that can get you connected and can be in your region to help you out as well. I'm happy to take phone calls or emails anytime. So hit me up on LinkedIn and we can get connected and start the conversation there.
Awesome. Cool. Hey, thank you so much again, Chase. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. See you soon.